I forgot to mention there is one dwarf cultivar, but it's not common at all. It's called Santa Barbara. But the regular version is perfectly fine. But any fall blooming plant, they bloom because of the short days. And so if you think about poinsettias, bums, salvia farinaceae, fall asters, and so as the days start to get short, that's what tells them to bloom. A lot of plants bloom because the days start to get long. There are some day neutral plants that just bloom all the time, but these very specific fall bloomers, that's why they trick things like poinsettias into blooming early by controlling the day length in the greenhouse. But what you do as a gardener on any of these fall blooming plants, you shear them once a month from the time they start growing in the spring. So April, May, it generally starts about May, June, July, August, and once you get to September, once Labor Day comes, you stop shearing them because at that point, of course, the days just started getting shorter, and then they log in those hours, and that gives you a much more compact plant. So every time you cut back a plant, you cut a shoot, then it's going to make like 3 shoots, and then you shear it outside of that the next time, and those 3 shoots make 3 shoots. You then got 9 shoots, and then you're multiplying. So you're going to get exponentially more flowers by shearing it. Now, if you wait till October, November and shear it, you're not going to get any blooms, and it's going to be trying to bloom as the first freeze comes along. So come September, that's when you stop. How far back? And so the question is, how far back do you cut it? When it first comes up and it gets about a foot tall or a couple of feet tall, a lot of times I'll take off an inch or so. And at that point, you kind of wait till it gets about the size that you want it to be. I say the size you want it to be, the size that you want the plant to be. So if you picture the plant as being the vase and the flowers being what's going to stick out of the vase, and so you're going to shear it off when it gets to that height, and you're going to take off just an inch or two, like trimming your hair, not like shaving somebody's head. Because if you cut it all the way to the ground, it sort of does the opposite. It flushes out longer shoots that are going to be even floppier. And the whole reason we're shearing it is to make more compact plants. And so there are some people that they don't get it, including my mentor, Dr. Parson. I just want to cut it back one time to the ground. Well, then you're literally not helping the situation. And then the next month, you're going to leave that exact same plant and you're going to shear off an inch or two, but you're going to go a little outside of what you did before. Because if you made 27 shoots, you don't want to shear those off and get back to your 9 shoots or your 3 flowers on there. And then, so you factor that in each time that you're shearing it a little outside of what you did before. And that way, come October, November, when they start blooming, you got a compact plant, a lot of flowers on it. If you don't, what they tend to do, and Country Girl Mom is a good example. I might have a picture in here. They're going to bloom, and they're just going to fall over on the ground because blooms are heavy, the plants are too lanky, and so you treat it basically like a dwarf holly up until September, and then you stop.
Can you do that with zinnias? Because I've got zinnias that shoot up way up.
Question is, can you do that with you can do that with any ever blooming? Not only can you should. And so not only, deadheading is just removing a spent flower to make another flower. Mostly that's cosmetic. And in the case of zinnias, they do make seed, so you're saving the energy of making seed too. But even better is to make the plant branch out more. So almost everything in the nursery trade that they sell has either been sheared, or they used to call it pinching. Now they actually use chemical growth regulators to make them more compact. But yeah, you make the plant be more compact. And so, there's no reason, sometimes it's fun to say, I've got a zinnia that's 7 feet tall, but generally all it takes is a rain or a windstorm, and it's like 7 millimeters tall because it's laying on the ground. And so, yeah, better to me, always better to, because we can call it pinching, shearing, cutting back, but we're talking about a little bit of cutting and making them bushy. So you always, when you're growing these plants, you're thinking about the shape and the structure of the plant, how many blooms you're going to get, and you can also use that for your deadheading. So instead of, you can go out there and hand pick every dead flower on a petunia or verbena or a lantana, which is way more time than most people have. If you want to do it, that's fine too. Or you can go out there with your shearing to make the plant more compact. You're also cutting off, dead flowers at the same time. And then the plants that bloom on new growth are going to flush out with new flowers. A lot of beginning gardeners, a lot of old gardeners will not cut off anything as long as they see a flower on there, though. And so eventually, over time, you just learn to make a judgment call. When I see more dead flowers than live flowers, I'm willing to sacrifice those live flowers because I'm fixing to flush out way more flowers with no dead flowers. And I always use the analogy, when you get if you get Valentine's Day roses. Well, the next time you get Valentine's Day roses, you don't stick the live ones back in with the brown dead ones from last year, but yet we do that growing flowers all the time. So, if you can get rid of the dead ones, knowing that you got new ones coming in there, as opposed to having them all mixed together. So yeah, you can shear and deadhead in one process. And if you got a lot to do, gas-powered or battery-powered shears can turn what used to be an hour job into a 15-minute job, or a 30-minute job into a 30-second job. And so that's what I tend to do now. And then makes them look better, makes them bloom more, makes them more compact. So yeah, any ever-blooming plant. You don't do it on a once blooming plant necessarily. There's some exceptions there. So yeah, definitely on the fall blooming stuff, and on anything makes a difference in good looking stuff and just a lot more flowers. And so here's an example of what the Salvia leucantha, or Mexican bush sage, looks like in a mass planting. And of course, some people say, well, there are people that don't want to grow perennials because they tend to bloom for a shorter season. And well, depending on the annual you put, you can put out a marigold or a petunia or a dwarf zinnia from the nursery. It's only going to bloom for probably a shorter period of time in the spring. And so the key is you got plants that live and come back each year. So that doesn't mean you have to plant your entire bed in it. It's okay if you do. If you're busy like me and you're just glad to see something live that blooms at all, that somebody hadn't killed, or a pig or a dog or an armadillo or a cat hadn't turned into a litter box, I just want something alive that does something sometime. And so, but if you want to plant annuals, fine. If you want to do half that bed in perennials, if you want to do a third of it in something shrubby, a third of it in perennials, and just have a little spot in front that you change out a third of it, or even just a little pocket of color, that's all up to you as the designer and the gardener. Perennials and annuals are kind of like, we're talking about roses and antique roses. The old joke about rosarians were, when they first got into roses, they did hybrid tea roses, and they did it by the book, and they're doing special pruning, and you're counting down to the first 5 leaflet and cutting back to an outward facing bud, and you're scraping the bud union, putting Elmer's glue on there on the tips of the cuts, and you're spraying every 7 to 10 days with fungicide and miticide and insecticide. And the next thing you know, they move into grandiflora roses, and then a couple, 10 years later, they're into floribundas, and then they get middle age and they're into shrub roses. By the time they're old men, they're growing wild species roses that bloom one time a year with 5 petals, and enjoying, the simplicity of that. And so the same way in the flower world, people start out with annuals, but a lot of times older gardeners tend to grow perennials that are tougher and easier and longer lived than things that actually grow. But it's up to you, and there's no judging it. It's just what you want to do. And I've been through every phase of gardening there is in my life. And none of them are wrong. I enjoyed every one of them. But eventually you settle in on something that fits you and fits your situation. And as we know, our situations change. And so sometimes you have to change with it. And so I've always said, I'm going to garden one way or the other. I may have to change what I do and where I do it, but you gotta adapt. A number of phlox, well, actually there are hundreds of phlox paniculata cultivars on the market. This is a prime example of what's native to Georgia, South Carolina, southeastern United States. And then Europeans brought it back, turned them into every color under the sun, orange and bicolors and doubles and purples and lavenders. But all the wild ones were magenta pink. And so almost every cultivar you buy out of a catalog and plant now will die in Texas and the South, even in Georgia and South Carolina where it came from, because they were moved for 100 years and bred for an entirely different climate. So it just shows how you can change something based on the conditions you're growing in. Just like the Salvia farinaceae. So John Fanick was one I found in an elderly lady's yard in San Antonio. And the reason I noticed it was this was the only color other than magenta pink I'd ever seen growing in the southern garden. And San Antonio's like half south, half hail. So it's like a whole different thing. So to see a perennial, I remember it's half under a live oak, half in the sun, whole yard, nothing but St. Augustine grass. And it was growing in the St. Augustine grass. And of course, she was bedridden, sun came to the door. So it was a prime example of a plant that wanted to grow and is still growing, even though somebody didn't have time to take care of it. She's dead, the house is gone, the yard's gone, the phlox is gone. And so also a lesson, like Dr. Parsons always said, if you see something, go get it now, buy it, swap for it, trade for it, get cuttings or whatever, because you never know it's going to be there when you come back. And so that's an example, is it's not there anymore. And so it's a good perennial. It was named a Tech Superstar. And so these are examples of other perennials. So we'll talk about perennial hibiscus later. There's the Henry Dilberg Salvia. That's John Fanick phlox, cannas. We'll mention those here in a minute. Phlox are outstanding for butterflies and moths. But if you want to see lots of butterflies, maybe not quite as good as lantana, but we're talking about the difference between hundreds and dozens and dozens. So you can name that butterfly.
Tiger.
Wow, good job. And so she gets her A. You need to leave, or you want to stay? So it's up to you. I'll sign your paper. You get your C and U's, you get to go. Yeah. First butterfly that was painted in North America, in North Carolina, the eastern tiger swallowtail. Occasionally comes in a solid black. So sometimes the females are all black, but if the sun shines through them, you can still see the tiger stripes in there, same spots and whatnot. So yeah, look, when you see a black swallowtail, there's about 4 or 5 different things it can be. But if you look and the sun's hitting it just right, you can recognize the black female more for the tiger swallowtail because you can still see the stripes. So beautiful butterfly. Most of the phlox are this color. And there was a really weird period in gardening history in Europe where they hated the color magenta. Now, the best thing about me living in San Antonio was seeing people paint their houses magenta, and you realize, I loved art and I love drawing and I love flowers. And so the fact that there was a whole period in our gardening history where we banished the color magenta, it reminded me of going to a group of children to their Crayola box and taking a color out of there saying, this color is bad, I'm going to get rid of it. Like, there's no bad color. I mean, they're just colors. It's like a rainbow out there. And so the fact that they banished magenta, it got rid of a lot of good plants. And it all had to do with a chemical byproduct, an insecticide that they made. It was just bizarre how we made it an issue, and we decided. So even really good American garden writers like Elizabeth Lawrence in North Carolina, that's dead now, she was still perpetuating that magenta bad thing. And a lot of times they say, well, that and even Dr. Welch, my mentor at A&M, he didn't call that magenta, he called it gaudy pink. Well, being from Shelby County, Hooterville, USA, when I heard gaudy, that's like a compliment. And so he didn't mean it as a compliment. And so ironic, but that's the flower, that's the native color of that flower on planet Earth. And so to go and say the original color is bad, that's the color it's supposed to be. So there's no bad color on the planet. Everything is just a color. And so one time I trialed all the commercial cultivars that you could buy of Phlox paniculata and all the different ones I'd collected out of gardens. And there's a lot of different ones, depending on who originally got something from the wild. Every wild plant was a different seedling, so they're all different variations of the same thing. Matter of fact, that one came from my first grade teacher, Miss Moselle. And so the only ones that lived were the ones I'd collected from gardens from the South. All the cultivars died. And so that's because they were selected and bred for Europe. And these were all things that were passed around to people in the South that had originated from the wild. And except for the John Fanick, they were all some variation of that hot pink color.
What year was that the magenta thing became up?
It was probably like probably late 1800s, early 1900s, somewhere along there. But Elizabeth Lawrence was still writing negative things about magenta in like the 60s and 70s. And so it's just amazing. And then they start making up stupid stuff like magenta is this, and they use words like horrid, this horrid color that would clash with orange. So just in case you ever planted orange, never plant magenta, so the two could never come together. It's like just dumb stuff. And so remember, it's your garden. You get to make the rules about colors and everything else. But starting my career in San Antonio with Dr. Parsons and doing bedding plant trials and seeing 99% of everything die, you learn to appreciate anything live out there in a field south of San Antonio. And like one year, a lady called the office and said, what can I grow that will live? And Dr. Parsons was really more of a vegetable specialist. He said, purple Jew. She said, I hate purple Jew. And I heard him say, you better learn to like purple Jew because sun, shade, glass of water, herbicide resistant, deer proof, alkaline acid. And so we don't have an endless choice of plants. And I don't mean how many cultivars exist on the earth. It's how many cultivars grow where you are. And it may be one color, two colors, no colors. And so we somehow think plants are like going to the McDonald's or shopping for shoes. The whole world can grow the same shoe or eat the same hamburger. But plants aren't like that. They have to be uniquely adapted for where you are. And so nothing wrong with sad thing is, that's the hardest one to buy. You can generally buy it. Now in Texas, there are some sources, but the rest of the world can't even buy the wild types. Perennial hibiscus are cool plant. They go back to Native American plants from the southeastern United States, actually from Texas all across the South. Matter of fact, marshmallows that we eat originated as a byproduct of a root from a mallow that grew native to the United States, artificially made now. But these are perennial hibiscus. So mostly in the garden world, when we grow hibiscus, we're buying hibiscus from Asia that are shrubs that are tropical, unless you're buying an Alethea. Those are a cold hardy shrub from Asia. But these are American in origin, but they show you what their ancestry was. So they go all the way up through the Midwest. And so we have cold winters. And so instead of being from a tropical climate that didn't have to worry about freezes, they come from an area where it freezes. So they store all their energy under the ground in these big fleshy roots, same kind of roots that the sticky stuff that made marshmallows came from, although it's a different species. And so these are perennial root hardy hibiscus that die back to the ground every year and come back from the root. So perennial hibiscus, rose mallow hibiscus. Now they do have, particularly the smooth leaf one, there's an insect called the hibiscus sawfly. Now, one thing about insects, remember I told you every plant's going to die? Well, also, every plant is going to get insect. Nature intended for them to get insects. Birds are a prime example. Birds feed their babies caterpillars. Dr. Doug Tallamy at Delaware showed it takes 1,000 and something caterpillars to raise one nest of baby chickadees. Multiply that times how many birds out there and realize the planet has to be covered with caterpillars, so you're not going to have birds. So every plant's going to get something. The key is when you have a plant, and beginning gardeners are like, what can I spray to kill that? Or even early in my career, it's like, what can I treat the entire yard with to kill every insect so I don't get those things? Well, the next thing you know, you had diazinon and dursban in the water supply, and they're banning chemicals because, and then the problem is you kill off everything. The worst spider mites I've ever seen have been in rose gardens or peach orchards where they sprayed Savanna all the time, killed every beneficial insect. There was nothing to keep the spider mites in check. And then you had these explosions where it's like cotton candy out there covered with webs, so many spider mites that you can't get them under control. So we've learned a lot in horticulture, and particularly in my life. And so when I see an insect on a plant, first of all, you can always tell the butterfly people because somebody will be so excited to have Gulf fritillary caterpillar larvae on their passion vine, and somebody else like, tell me what I can spray today because this stuff is eating all the leaves off my vine. And so, but if that caterpillar killed the passion vine, that caterpillar would go extinct. So those things evolved together over thousands and thousands of years. So to me, it's part of the show. And so I try to teach my gardeners now that, I was trained that it was all about the perfect bloom or the perfect vegetable, and you win the flower show, the blue ribbon and whatnot at all costs, whatever it took to produce that. Well, really not a very good way of sustainable gardening. And now it's about the bloom, the bird, the bee, the butterfly are exactly equal in my mind. So if there's no flower on that plant and I see a pretty bird, it was worth gardening. If I have a plant and there's nothing on there, but yet there's a butterfly laying eggs and the caterpillar starts eating it, and I know that caterpillar egg's going to hatch back into that, turn into that butterfly. It's all part, to me, it's the same as that I produce blooms on that plant. Let's make it much easier, much more interesting. But the first thing you always do is when you have an insect is identify it. Every week I'm having to answer questions from people that come in, or they come to the help desk and they stump somebody at the help desk. They got a problem, they don't know what to do, so they put out fungicide, insecticide, 2 or 3 times, liquid granules. You don't even know what it is. And so it's not a very good way to treat anything. And the big change in my life came after marriage. A cat lady, and you build a raised bed, and because I'm a farmer where I do row crops, but I'll plant anywhere. And so you build a raised bed, a cat just sees a giant new litter box. So I'm trying to clean up sweet potato weevils on this man's sweet potato, family sweet potato that he brought from Mississippi. And so I treated these plants. And then this kitten is out there, prancing around in the bed, licking its paws and all that stuff. And next thing you know, you got this kitten with this horrible neurological condition that I have to take to the vet. That to this day, the wife thinks ate a toxic mushroom. And then my brother's a veterinarian. And so, clearly something bad wrong with this cat. So mostly use fairly safe insecticides. Insecticides are ranked from a caution that are pretty safe to warning that are a little more toxic to danger, like you're going to die, don't touch it. So I tell homeowners, stick to the ones that say caution. Even better, stick to nothing if you can. I'll tell you about that in a second. But dead cat, $200 bill. And it turns out that pyrethrins, which are originally derived from a plant, well, actually, they're pretty darn toxic to cats. And so we've always gardened about thinking about our plant, what I'm going to do, and we didn't care what else happened. We didn't think about what else happened. And so that was a prime example. And you think about how many hundreds of exponential trillions of times we've killed off other things in the process of trying to save one little thing. So first thing you do is you identify exactly what it is. If you can't tell me what that insect is, don't spray nothing. And then if it's a caterpillar, I want you to tell me which caterpillar, which moth, which butterfly, and you're going to justify killing off that butterfly or moth. And so you got to learn something. You got to decide. And then you say, is it going to kill my plant? Is there going to be economic harm here? Am I going to lose the crop? Am I going to lose the family farm? Am I not going to be able to send the child to school? Can I not afford a car because his plant died? And so, is it going to kill the plant? And if it's going to kill the plant, well, if it's a cheap plant, if it's something you didn't need anyway, if it's going to die that year anyway, maybe not that big a deal. Most of the time, people start spraying stuff after all the damage is done and the insect is gone. It ain't coming back to life. Brown's not turning green. Holes aren't disappearing in the leaf. And so if you can't catch it before the damage occurred, you're wasting your time. But people just feel like they got to do something. And then even more important, is it going to grow right back like that passion vine because it evolved with that insect? So in this case of this, same thing with lantana lace bugs, canna leaf rollers. In this particular case, the saw, you cut it to the ground, it flushes right back, new leaves. You didn't have to apply anything to it. You just cut it back. You're going to shear it anyway to keep it bushy. And so if you wanted to spray it, but who has the time to even mix up water these days without trying to decide, is this insecticide hurting this, that, me? A lot of links now between Parkinson's disease and pesticides. And I got friends that have been in the industry my whole life that have Parkinson's now. And you can't help but think like, oh my gosh, that guy worked in the spraying lawns his whole life. Did that cause it? And so not a good idea to be killing stuff if you can't really justify it. And for heaven's sake, know what it is and know why you're doing it. Don't just start spraying stuff. And people don't know the difference between a fungicide, an insecticide, and a miticide. But if I fling enough stuff, maybe it's going to make it right. And it doesn't work like that. Life is not that simple. And so I don't get too upset about sawfly larvae because they don't hurt the plant. I just shear it back, it flushes back out. Greg can talk forever. Some of these don't exist in the trade anymore. Dr. Moy, who's no longer alive, was a really cool breeder at San Antonio. He bred the largest flowered perennial hibiscus on planet Earth. People used to try to correct us, say, you meant Moy Grania. This was a Chinese man in San Antonio. This is bilingual Chinese-Spanish. So no, that is the correct spelling. So that's the beauty of naming it. You get to name it how you want it. And so Ying Dun Moy. And so I actually used to breed some hibiscus. And so there are a lot of cool things on the market now. There's some really good breeders out there. So these don't necessarily exist anymore, although this one does. That was actually a sport. You know what a sport is? A bud sport. So in horticulture, a plant's growing along happy, and one shoot comes out and decides, I want to be different. So maybe a white plant that makes a pink flower. It may be a single flowered plant that a double flower came out on there. The most common sports in horticulture, green leaf plant, here comes a little shoot that's got variegation in there. And so then you propagate vegetatively from that little bud sport, and you've got a different plant. Doesn't always mean it's going to stay like that. It's particularly variegation. There are different times. It could be a thornless shoot on a thorny plant. And then you have to grow it out and see if it's stable. And a lot of times variegated plants, certain kind of variegations are stable, certain kinds aren't. Some sports that you're familiar with, you never thought you were familiar with, or Red Delicious Apple was a sport on a branch. Ruby Red Grapefruit, that was a sport on a citrus. And so that just shows you how things can come along. And literally the plant, and you got to have a keen eye for that, and you got to propagate it. And so it happens. A kid that just looks at plants his entire life, I just love, just staring at every shoot on the plant, just daring it to change into something, because I'm going to be the first one on earth that sees it, because that's just what I do. And so this was a shoot on a plant in the Nacogdoches in the neighborhood. It's a magenta pink flowered hibiscus, and so made a shoot, and some of them were half magenta, half white, and so all white. But then in the white portions, it had the flecks of the color. And so it just turned out to be stable. So a couple of rounds of cuttings, and it named it Peppermint Flare. So it's the cool thing about Flare is a really good breeder out of Florida. It was a friend of Dr. Parsons had bred these. So it's a sterile or self-sterile hibiscus. So in the old days, when these plants were first getting popular, and they still sell some seed-grown perennial hibiscus. So some of the perennial hibiscus will grow, bloom, and set a bunch of clusters of seed pods full of seed. Well, any plant that's making seed, just like anybody that's having babies and trying to raise a family, you got all your money and energy and time are going to raise those children. So the plants that set a bunch of seed aren't making new shoots and new blooms. That's why we deadhead those kind of plants. And so if you can automatically breed or select for plants that are sterile, we do crazy things in horticulture that are not acceptable in the rest of the world. And so that means it's constantly blooming. It can't make seed. Every energy is going into new blooms. And so the ideal plants are those that, particularly on an ever-blooming plant. Now, if it's a plant that had to be propagated from seed, you wouldn't want to breed a sterile bluebonnet. You never have a crop of seed. You never grow a bluebonnet again. But in this particular case, it's ideal. So sometimes when you buy a cultivar, if you don't know that particular cultivar and it's a seed-grown strain, they grow, they bloom, look real pretty. They set seed pods, and they spend the rest of the summer just sitting there with seed pods on. You don't get any blooms. So back when I was doing hibiscus work, we tried to stick to those that were either sterile or self-sterile that would continue to grow and bloom, and that was an example of what I'm. Anyway, lots of cool ones out there. All fun. And for a beginning gardener that's never grown anything before, really cool to grow plants that make flowers, big ones. My great-grandmother, Wallace, she called them a dishpan hibiscus. Here's a lady in Tyler. She had to have me come out and look at hers because, I mean, you never gardened before. It's only plant in your yard. Like, look what I did. Giant plant, easy to grow, tall as me, flowers as big as dinner plates. And so it's a great plant to get people hooked on gardening. So it's a gateway plant. And so you can see why my great-grandmother called them dishpan hibiscus, because people aren't used to seeing flowers that big. Now, back when Dr. Moy was doing his breeding, he and I used to breed for big flowered hibiscus. And so he was breeding for little flowered hibiscus. And I see this big one in there. I'm like, no, he said, no, too big. I said, this is Texas. There ain't nothing too big. And he's like, no, there needs to be little. So nobody wants a little hibiscus. And so Dr. Parsons actually stole that from his own breeding trial, named it, introduced it to the trade. He's dead and gone now, but he became famous for a hibiscus that he never intended to select. Nobody wants your little bitty stuff. We want this big old thing. And then I took a sister of Moy Grande and started breeding. I bred giant flowered hibiscus. The problem is, turns out you can get too big. So I used to have a block 4 times the size of this room, and they would open up. Flowers are so big that they would start breaking off. And so you watch your beautiful like, shh, shh. Okay, I guess there is such a thing as too big. So if you can't hold the flowers up anymore and the petals snap off, maybe you went a little too far. But most homeowners don't care if it's 6 inch, 7 inch, 8 inches. I mean, I was doing like 12 and 14 inch flowers, but anyway.
Yeah. Do they only last a day, isn't it?
They only last a day, just like daylilies and Raleigh, and there are a lot of plants, but they got tons of buds on there, so you got new ones opening every day.
You don't want to shear your hibiscus.
Yes, I do. 2 things. First of all, in between bloom cycles, because even the stuff that's ever blooming, weather, conditions, whatnot, they're just cycles, just like the salvia. So whatever point that there's not so many blooms on there, or you got shoots here and shoots there, or every plant I grow, I pretty much say, this is your space. I know what size you're going to get, and I know what shape is kind of your natural shape, and I just envision that shape. It fills up that space. It goes past it. You're shearing those branches off there because not every plant's always tidy. Sometimes branches break and whatnot. So yeah, I'll be shearing it for shape. And if it has more spent blooms than not, and you got to stay ahead of it. You don't, because if it goes through that cycle and then suddenly all the new shoots are coming out on there going to have the new blooms on there, and it's covered with 4-inch shoots, and you go in there and shear it to tidy it up, and you've sheared off all those shoots that were fixed to be bloom, you've just set yourself back on the bloom. So you got to play it. You learn in time exactly when to shear, right when most of the flowers have gone past, and then you're making it when it's coming out with those new shoots even more than it would have had. So yeah, I shear them regularly for shaping and to make blooms on there. And at the end of the year, when it starts getting cool, unlike a tropical hibiscus that didn't evolve with any winter, doesn't know winter is coming, that's why they die if you don't drag the pot in or buy a new one. The perennial ones that come from temperate zones, they shut down, they quit blooming, leaves start turning yellow, they start sending all that energy down in those deep roots. And then come the first freeze, you got to cut it off at the ground because none of those shoots are going to come back next year. It's only going to sprout from the ground again. And so whatever point is ugly, you cut it to the ground, like because those branches are finished. And so you cut back because of the plant that's going to die back, but then you shear because of the habit. Not a whole lot of true lilies that we grow in Texas. So if I had another month to continue talking to y'all, I'd talk about every fake lily on the planet. So in Texas, we grow a lot of things that aren't lilies. True lilies are in the genus Lilium. And so if you think Easter lilies, tiger lilies, if you go to the Northwest and Europe and Washington and all that, you'll see lots of real lilies. We don't have a lot of real lilies that grow here because they rather prefer more of a cushier climate. And so what we grow mostly are fake lilies. So if you think about it, crinum lilies aren't lilies, spider lilies aren't lilies, rain lilies aren't lilies, day lilies aren't lilies, St. Joseph's lily aren't lilies, Lent lilies aren't lilies. So we grow fake lilies that are lily-esque, but not true lilies. And so not a huge difference. Lilium is in the genus Liliaceae, the lily family. All those other fake lilies, most of them are in the Amaryllis family, a tougher, more southern tropical sort of family. And so here's one. If you get on Jeopardy, what's the difference between a lily and an amaryllis? And so what's the difference between being in the lily family and the amaryllis family? Who cares? 6 petals, they look kind of like lilies. But if you're in a taxonomy class or a botany class, you got to know if you're breeding them. And so lilies, true lilies in the genus Lilium, have what they call a superior ovary. Not that their ovary is better than anybody else's, but the seed pod that forms on a lily. And if you grow these, they make a bunch of seed. And so the pod is above where the petals are inserted there. So it means the ovary is above the petal insertion there. So that's a superior ovary. Amaryllis, if you ever grow an amaryllis and it makes seed, they have inferior ovaries. The seed pod forms below where the petals are. It's not up there in the middle of the petals, it's down below. And so every plant's either one or the other. And so that's one of the biggest difference between those two families. Otherwise, they're kind of similar. And a general rule, and you're sitting there thinking like, there's 99 things out of the 99.2 that he said that I didn't need to know. And so most people are not able to accept a bazillion things, plant names in their life. And so if you go way back in history, there was about 5 common plants that the average person on the street knew. Lilies, bay, laurel, rose, jasmine. And so our gardens to this day are full of things that we call those names because it's the only names we know. So if it looked like a lily, we call it a lily. If it looked like a jasmine, Cape jasmine's not a jasmine. Yellow jasmine's not a jasmine. Look like a laurel, we called it a laurel. Look like a myrtle, we call it crepe myrtle's not a myrtle. Texas mountain laurel's not a laurel, not a mountain laurel either. So the deal is we can't comprehend all those names, so if we take the common ones, we just lump them in there. It's like me and my pants. It may not fit, but if you push hard enough, it's going to go in there. And so we can't learn all those others, so there's nothing wrong with that. Now, the cool thing about Philippine lilies or Formosan lilies, they're one of the few lilies you can grow from seed to bloom in the same year, and they will naturalize. And so blooms at the hottest, nastiest time of year in the middle of the summer. And so what do you think pollinates a Philippine lily? Remember I told you the gray leaves tell you something about the plant growing in the sun. If you see a white flower and it blooms and it has a long tube on it, that almost guarantees you it's going to be moth pollinated. And so moth pollinated plants have to have a couple of different things. Of course, they got a long tube because only moths and butterflies have something long enough to go down there. Because, the ovaries down here, so their tongue has to go all the way down through there. They're white, so reflect moonlight. So you're out there looking for something to pollinate. They reflect the light, and then they're fragrant. So they're attracted by the fragrance, the reflected light. So if you see something white and fragrant in a long tube, almost guarantees you it's moth pollinated. And if you want something fun for kids, when these are in bloom, and it may be July, August, sometime in the middle there will be hawk moths, white-lined sphinx moths out there like flocks of birds pollinating those things, just bumbling all around, cramming themselves in the flower, pollen all over everything. And as a kid, something I learned to do on the 4 o'clocks of my grandmother, you take a flashlight out there. Those moths are navigated by moonlight. And so you shine a flashlight in their eyes and they're like flopping around on the ground and upside down. Oh, the moon's setting on my head. Where am I going? And so, yeah, fun for boys to do. It's kind of the same way we collected lightning bugs to in a orange juice jar so we could fill the entire thing up and have a lamp to carry around in the woods. Like, never quite got it full, but it wasn't because we didn't try. Now, the cool thing is I got these from a little lady in Arlem, Texas, in Russ County. When I was in college, I was driving through there down the road, and I'm like, I think I just saw 1,000 Easter lilies in the woods. So I turned the car around and go back. Little white house, tucked off the road, tucked up in the woods, little wire fence, and this lady had lilies in the yard, lilies outside the yard, lilies down the roadside. I'm like, that's the prettiest thing I've ever seen. So I knock on the door, and a lady about this tall comes out, Christine Langston. And I said, that's the prettiest thing I've ever seen in my life. She said, just a minute. So she went to the back of the house and brought me a bread sack full of seed. They're little flat paper seed. They look like they're made out of spun gold. And so I remember that day I thought, I'm going to try to have as many lilies as Miss Langston. She's dead. The house is gone. Eventually grew up in woods. Last time there were any lilies, they're on the roadside. And the day I stopped to look at them, here comes the mower on the highway. He just mowed down glorious white lilies, and there's none of them left now. And so even though it's a prolific reseeder, it's not an invasive plant. Otherwise, it would have spread up and down the woods and down the roadside. So they like a disturbed site, but they won't persist forever. Anyway, so I eventually had as many as Miss Langston. Now, here's the funny part. I swear she told me that her son brought her those from the Philippines. Made sense. I didn't know the name was Philippine lily till years later. Visited a specialty nursery in Georgia, and they had the name on there. And that's what it was. It made sense because she told me about that. Years later, I meet a lady that lived in Arlem that went to school with my parents, and I told her about. She said, "I know exactly who you're talking about." And well, actually, she said, "You tell me where it is. I'll tell you whose house it was because I knew everybody there." She was coming through. I tied a ribbon on a tree. So next time I saw her, she said that was Miss Langston. And she said, and by the way, she had no son in the Philippines. I don't know where you got that from. So apparently, I was the only person ever she confided to that she had an illegitimate child in the Philippines, because why would I make that up? Anyway, yeah, anywho, funny. And so this is, eventually they jumped out of my yard into my pine forest and had thousands of lilies. Whole thing smells like baby powder, 10,000 moths flapping around. And so these are woods that I burn every year. And you'd think, burning, kills certain things, but it actually stimulates others. And so a spring burn, control burn, and a Philippine lily, and also with another old-fashioned plant called Jewels of Opara, they just loved it. And of course, my native plant friends weren't too excited that I was trying to create a native habitat, and I got like 10,000 Asian lilies growing out there, but I, of course, didn't have the heart to hurt one of them. And they didn't, now that I eventually thinned that out, and they're going to struggle. The deer love them too. I actually found her offspring later on to talk to him, and he used to have a whole bunch like that too, and there wasn't any left on the property. He said, last year there were solid out there, and I went out there and looked, and so deer had eaten every one of them. So lilies true lilies tend to be edible, and so I got lots of deer, and so they'd have probably eaten them. But I thought that's kind of fun because I promised myself I was going to have as many as she did, and eventually had more than Miss Langston did, and her illegitimate Filipino child. So. Firebush is a plant that's unique to Texas. Not unique. That species is native to Central America and Mexico. I actually took a trip to plant hunting in Belize one time to hunt for different colors of firebush. Turns out there was no firebush in the wild that looked like the firebush that we grew in Texas. And so all the firebush in Texas that we grow came from one church in Laredo. And so Dr. Parsons and I used to take a trip to South Texas every year to look for heat-tolerant plants, because he's like, if you look for heat-tolerant plants, where would you go? What's the hottest place you can think of? I'm like, I don't know. He'd say, hell, son, that's the hottest place. What's the closest thing you can get to hell in Texas? Laredo. So let's go to Laredo. And you drive up and down little poor yards and stuff. And of course, there's beautiful flowers down there. And I remember one day I was hunting for antique roses and found this really pretty tea rose, and sitting there in the hotel room. It was 113 degrees, hottest place in the nation that day. So yeah, if you want heat tolerance, you go to Laredo, Del Rio, places like that. Anyway, this grew at a church, a Catholic church in Laredo. And so there was a nursery down there, Gentry's Nursery, always bragging on this plant. Nobody could propagate it. And it turns out, thanks to Dr. Parsons and modern technology and rooting hormones and bottom heat and greenhouse and all that, it just needed bottom heat and some hormones. It eventually became standard in the trade. But I never paid much attention. It doesn't set seed. So when I went to Belize for 10 days and saw thousands and thousands of plants, none of them looked like our plant. They're all fuzzy leaf. They all had black fruit on there. And so apparently this was was a hybrid because I did find a couple of different species and a few natural hybrids. So just a prime example. Matter of fact, I'll be doing a training at the Texas Superstar Advanced Training in a couple of weeks in San Antonio. And one of the talks is about how you find Texas Superstar. We find them everywhere. You're just looking everywhere because sometimes you find something. So the only place on earth that plant was 2 plants at this Catholic church in Laredo, Texas, and it turned out to be a really good plant for Texas. Don't know where it came from. They didn't either. But it's a good plant, good hummingbird plant, extremely heat tolerant. Now, here's a prime example. As a perennial, when it freezes to the ground and comes back, it's a late summer bloomer, fall bloomer. As an annual, you can go by the nursery and put a gallon plant out in May in full bloom. It's going to bloom May, June, July. So it's a different plant as a tropical annual than it is as a perennial. So anytime you freeze a plant to the ground or cut a plant all the way to the ground, it turns it into a vegetative stage, just the reason we shear as opposed to cutting things way back. And it takes them longer to bloom because that vegetative tissue has to gradually turn into adult blooming flowers. So anyway, flowers aren't very big, but it makes a lot of them, and it cannot get too hot. That's a baking hot parking lot in San Antonio, and you can see not one brown leaf, one yellow, not yellow, unirrigated, hot, so nothing too hot for firebush or Hamelia patens. Iris, a lot of cool iris for Texas. We won't go into all of them, but you got bearded iris and beardless iris. Iris are in the iris family. They do have 6 petals, but kind of lily-like too. The fleur-de-lis, if you watch the Saints football or whatnot, that the fleur-de-lis is actually a stylized European iris pseudacris. So 3 petals up, the standards, and 3 petals down the falls. And so mostly here we can do Louisiana iris, we can do certain bearded iris. Bearded iris are popular all over the world, but they really prefer drier and cooler. So the further west you go in Texas and the further north you go in Texas, the more bearded iris you can grow. The closer you get to the Gulf Coast, the fewer you can grow. And remember what I told you about gray leaves? So bearded iris have gray leaves. They come from the Mediterranean. Iris native to the south have slick green leaves, come from high rainfall areas. And so the plant automatically tells you ahead of time what conditions it grows in. So start learning to study your plants like that and know where they are, where they've been, and where they'll grow. Dr. Welch was just a master at. He was the first that showed not only that there are perennials in the South, that all these cool antique roses could be used for landscaping when the rest of the world was putting hybrid tea roses in the backyard because they were too ugly to put in the front yard, and you sprayed them all the time. And he was the first one to come along and say there are a lot of good roses and perennials that have been grown in the South. So we do these amazing landscapes full of perennials and cottage garden plants and antique roses, and literally changed horticulture in Texas and the South. I grow a Louisiana iris in my rain garden, and so you can collect your runoff water. So 8 acres of my property drains in that pond. I got ball cypress, I got Louisiana iris, ornamental Jack Russell Terriers in there, and so you can. And it's kind of the way swamps work in nature. And so, water is a huge issue in Texas. Runoff water and pollution is a huge issue on the entire planet. And so really every gardener should be responsible, every homeowner, every property owner, for the water on their property, where it goes once they get through with it. Because we're really bad as gardeners and homeowners and landowners just thinking water is like flushing a toilet. We don't care what we do to it, we send it down to somebody else. And now we got too many people and too many things in the water. And so rain gardens are a way for us to do that. And we as horticulturists and landscapers can actually make them ornamental gardens, and they're pretty, and a lot of what we call marginal plants that actually grow in the mud and sunlight. And so as a kid, born in Tyler, but raised in Longview, I didn't want azaleas, camellias, and gardenias, and nandinas. I wanted a cactus and rock garden. So we have to be really bad as gardeners. We always want what we don't have, generally what we can't grow. And you look around, I don't want what everybody else has. Well, if everybody else has it, that means it grows. If nobody has it, often that means it doesn't grow. And I collect plants, and I have friends that collect plants, and I'd always make them mad when I say, I know y'all like rare plants, but if a plant is rare, it's generally either ugly or it won't grow. Because if it's pretty and grew, wouldn't everybody have it? Well, so some people like to collect things that are really hard to grow or really homely and ugly because they know they're going to be the only ones that have it. That's okay. You do whatever you want. But don't ever bash a plant because you see a bunch of people have it, or you see it in the wild or on the roadside or in a crown tire planter on the bad side of town or on the edge of the train tracks, because that means it grows. You take it home, do something really beautiful and ornamental with it. Yes, ma'am.
Louisiana.
Yes, ma'am.
Are they all purple?
No. The question is, are all Louisiana iris purple? And so Louisiana iris can be white, yellow, purple, blue, bicolor, brick red. Matter of fact, the whole reason Iris is named Iris, Iris was the goddess of the rainbow, and in the genus Iris has every color in the rainbow in there. And so no,
What is their average height?
they're everything from dwarf to tall. And so depending on the parentage, there's 5 species in Louisiana, sometimes 6. There's 3 in Texas. And so we have 3 species native to East Texas. Iris fulva is the only one that has red. So some of them get 4 feet tall. Our own native Iris brevicalis, the short stem iris, gets 1 foot tall. So there's everything in there from about 1 to 4 feet. A lot of them descend from Iris giganta cerulean from Louisiana, which means tall. But because they've been so popular and they've all bred all the different colors, there's every height and every color. Really fun to collect because they all grow here. And they don't have to grow in mud. They can grow in regular garden soil. That's alkaline garden soil. They can grow in mud. They can grow in acid sands, but they do need sunlight. And they need a moist winter, which we almost always have. And it doesn't matter with the summertime because that's their dormant period. And you cut them back in the summer, grow foliage in the winter, bloom in the spring. Mexican honeysuckle, just an oddball, a little more common in South Texas, but certainly grows here as well. Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susans, a lot of different species. Most of them are perennial, except the common one you see on the roadside, that's mostly annual. So Rudbeckia hirta is an annual, but a lot of good garden cultivars and species of Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susans. One of them that's cool is Rudbeckia maxima, the giant coneflower, the swamp coneflower. It's a prime example how this plant is native primarily to Texas and a little bit of the surrounding states. Was never a popular plant in Texas because why would I grow something on the roadside? I want something from the north, from the store, the catalog, the see on TV or in a book, not something from a ditch. But other people saw like, oh my gosh, look at this amazing thing. It's got silver foliage, it's got giant flowers, it's tall. And so it became popular in Holland and then Europe and then New York and then the East Coast. And the last place anybody ever grew it was in East Texas. And still, it's not common here. It's like, didn't I see that driving down I-20 the other day? Why would I want that? Once again, we should, if you see it growing on the roadside, that tells you it doesn't need water, doesn't need fertilizer, doesn't need insecticide. And if it's native, that means it supports every pollinator that's been there for 10,000 years. And so those are good things. But somehow as gardeners, we've always made that a bad thing. And the last thing we want is something that we have. And so my rule is take it and do something different with it. And even if it's not different, why would you not grow something? Matter of fact, I was giving a talk one time in Nacogdoches, Texas. They said, I don't want that because you can't kill it. I said, so you want stuff that dies? Is that what I'm hearing? I said, you're either living or dying. So you either plant something that's dying or you plant something that's living. So that was just her natural reaction because it's too tough. It lives. Lady complained on Facebook the other day about Turk's cap. Can't kill it. The roots are too deep. I can't get it out of the ground. Well, why would you plant it if your intention was to pull it out of the ground? And the woman said, that's why it's so drought tolerant. It has deep roots. And so we find any reason to take a good plant and turn it into a bad plant. And it's usually based on, because it lives too much. Well, imagine if we judge, I'm not marrying you because you're alive. Like, that sounds creepy. And you're going to keep living. Maybe that's a successful marriage right there. I don't know. So here's an example in one of only 2 places in East Texas where there were solid stands. Both of them have now been eradicated with herbicide because the rancher doesn't want flowers. And so it's really sad in Texas where every early description of Texas described flowers as far as the eye could see. The whole southeast was savannas. We're in the post-oak savanna. Those were open forests. And in the springtime, with literally just flowers. You could ride horses without hitting a branch. And nowadays, you can hardly find native stands of any of our native perennials.
You go down 977, you'll find these.
It's a cool plant.
Take your little shovel and go for it.
And then Greg goes out there and selects golden leaf forms, variegated form, blue leaf ones. I even have a selection that I've made that I'll introduce one day that has the bicolor bronze and yellow petals on there. Ornamental grasses, once again, the last place they were popular in Texas because we're covered with grasses. We're pulling up grass in the flower beds. We don't want grass. Grasses have snakes. Grasses have rats. I don't want that crap. And so popular all over Europe, popular in the Northeast, probably. So the last place they got to be popular was grassland areas. Anyway, that's just the way it works. And so here's an example in Germany where grasses are interesting because they're real soft. They tend to not get pests. Now you have different grasses from different parts of the world, a lot of different cultivars, a lot of different flower types, but it just shows an example of using grasses in landscaping. So native grasses of Texas, one's a Texas superstar, the Gulf Coast muley grass, Muhlenbergia capillaris. Comes in a pink form and comes in a white form. There's a landscape in Lufkin, Texas, done primarily in native grasses. That's pretty cool. Little blue stem and Gulf muley. And I mentioned fall blooming plants. A really common aster in Texas is one that's native from North Texas on up. It's called an Astra oblongifolius, although they've changed the genus for asters into Symphyiotrichum. They changed the genus for verbenas into Glandularia. And so you go to an SFA plant sale and you're looking for verbenas, so you look it up and here's Glandularia. Nope, that's not a verbena. Here's a common name, mock vervain. That's not a verbena. So the word verbena is not used because there's people out there, they just think they just need to keep changing things around. Anyway, it has to do with genetics and whatnot. So that's our hardy aster, fall aster, Michaelmas daisy. Tough, long-lived, easy to grow, perennial in Texas, blooms in the fall, sheared over a month till September, then let it go. Other plants that are fall bloomers, the mums, that's a old pass-along mum that apparently originated in Texas from what most people can come up with. The country girl mum. See how those are flopped around? That was not sheared during the year. You can make it, it's a little prone to flopping anyway, but if you keep it sheared, you can make it stand up more, but pretty even, it's flopped over.
What are we seeing on the roadside right now with all the phlox? It's purple, and it's like a phlox, it's like a vine.
The vine thing.
That's bindweed, and so that's a morning glory, and so that's a little wild morning glory. It's technically an invasive species, but it's tough, and I do see a lot of butterflies on it.
The vines are already on all the fences.
Yeah, and so it's they call it bindweed because it's literally you get tangled up in the mower and tangled up in the tiller, and so. But it's pretty. And now one thing I tell my master gardeners, even the invasive plants, there's a good example. Not supposed to be here. It didn't come from here. But, better to have any live plant than dead plants. Better to have bindweed on the roadside than bare dirt. Every plant, even if it's a non-native plant, that doesn't mean go around. We've almost killed off a lot of our native stuff, and we're covered neck deep in invasive stuff. But every living plant cools the air, cleans the water, prevents erosion. So never get too judgmental with people about what they got. Now we want to train them to grow things that are more local, more adapted, support more pollinators and stuff. But the main thing is we want them to grow a plant. And most people start off with any plant, and then we work them up from there. Half the public doesn't garden at all. And so you're not going to start them with something hard, and you're not going to keep somebody gardening and say, bad dog, you're growing the wrong plant. It's like, oh, okay, I won't garden. And so we got to do a good job of teaching people. Most of the mums you buy at the store are pot mums that are bred in a greenhouse to just be in bloom for a few weeks, and you throw in the trash can. They're not good perennials. And so it turns out we have a number of them. So all my life I've collected true perennial mums for Texas. Most of them are hard to come by. We used to sell them at the SFA plant sales. A few of them are available. And so this one came from the middle of a pasture, growing on the clump of a nandina from an old home place at my grandmother Rue's sister's first husband's mother's old home place. And so her name was Mildred Golden. And so any chrysanthemum that wants to bloom in a pasture in East Texas, it hadn't been cultivated. I never even knew the people who saw the house there, but I knew that's where they lived. Now, it is a garden thug. Doesn't set seed, doesn't spread across the country, but you got a mom that doesn't only not die in 3 weeks, it's not going to die in 300 years, it's going to swallow up your flower bed. Here's the way you grow those plants. Dr. Welch has a bed, it's covered, one side is concrete, one side is brick, and it fills it up. It's got some roses and some bird baths and stuff in there. And so there's nothing wrong with picking a plant. We're really bad about planting a plant, and you stay here, and you stay here, and I either cultivate this or I put mulch between here. Better to have a plant that this grows here, and this grows here, and this grows here. There's no weeds, there's no mulch, solid plants. And so that's the smarter way. And you're getting more ecosystem services, more air cooling, more water cooling, more preventing more erosion. But somehow we thought everything just had to be in its place, but not the smartest way. Plus, we eliminated all those plants that grew together, thinking that was a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You just got to put them in the right spot. So a lot of times people say, oh, I would never grow like Ruellia. Well, you don't grow it in like your bed with your petunias, but you got a bed out there by the mailbox, or there's little Mexican restaurants that have a bed in front, and it's concrete and asphalt, and this beautiful flowers. So you put those things between a rock and a hard place, let that fill up the bed. You got something that comes back every year. You don't water, you don't spray, you got flowers. And so it's about using the plants in the right spot. Not if it's invasive, not if it's going to cover the world, but I don't care if it covers a flower bed, because I'd rather it cover the flower than me have to go out there and cover the flower bed. This one is equally as vigorous, came from a lady down the street, Alcine Johnson. It was growing on the base of a post oak tree. And by the way, you're where the post oak savanna starts, with a little bit of the southeastern pines coming over here. I'm way over in the Pineywoods, but there's not these distinct lines and ecoregions. And so I've got, my property is actually more like post oak savanna there. So hills, post oak, shortleaf pine. And so these things don't just have distinct lines. So post oak savanna comes over to me, Pinewoods comes over to you. And if you go far enough west, you lose the pines. You go far enough east, you lose the post oak savanna. But here we are, 2 hours apart, and we share ecoregions. So that's Alcine Johnson. Dr. Welch's aunt grew this in somewhere down in German area, southwest of Houston there. So we call it Aunt Burn, because that was a little bitty button mom, red buttons. Cigar plant's another fall bloomer. I heard somebody talking about sipping the nectar out of a flower. This has some sweet nectar that kids like to suck on there. It's a fall blooming plant. Some people call it the candy corn plant. You shear it up to September, erupts in these blooms. It's native to Mexico. So that's the fall blooming cigar plant. There's also, there it is in the garden. Actually, that's at the Antique Rose Emporium. Just a good, tough, easy to grow perennial. In the genus Kufia, and Kufias are in the same family as crepe myrtles, believe it or not. And so there are some ever-blooming Kufias, including Mexican heather, which is more of an annual. This is David Verity, which is a good perennial. So all Kufias are good for Texas. You just got differences in cold hardiness and bloom time. So really interesting plants. Of course, the bees love them and the hummingbirds love them too. Some perennials for shade. Hostas aren't the best thing for Texas, because you need some moisture and some shade. So I'm not a huge hosta fan, because they really belong more in the north in Europe. But Keith Hansen, the county horticulturist in San Antonio years ago, did hosta trials there in Tyler. And it all had to do with genetics. And so all the hostas that came from genetics from Southeastern Asia did better. And all the hostas from northern, colder climates in Asia did worse. And so he selected out some that did better. Unfortunately, our little Tyler Botanic Garden, there's a public garden. So eventually all the hostas were stolen, because you got a free garden. If something does too good, well, then it ends up doing too good in somebody else's yard. And so the ones that he showed that did well in Tyler were So Sweet, Sugar and Cream. And he and I used to fight, because I'd always tell people, don't grow hostas in Texas. Of course, certainly not Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, awful places, but East Texas, okay. And I'd say it's all about expectations, because people say, I got a hosta, and you look, it's this big, and the leaves are brown on it. I said, if that was a child or a pet, you'd be arrested. And here you are bragging on your hosta. It's because a hosta can't scream and cry, because that's what I can hear, like, take me away, let me die, this is awful. And so Keith and I would argue about this, and I would show this picture of one of my students in a garden in Ohio with a hosta up to his chins and leaves out to his hands. I said, this is what the rest of the world considers a hosta. We started my rule way back there. If you grow a plant and it doesn't perform better on your property than any place else on the planet, then you shouldn't be growing it there. You shouldn't have something. We wouldn't do that with anything else. I'm buying a car and it only runs at 33%. I'm buying a racehorse, but it only can run half as fast as the rest of them. We don't do that anything else in the world, but in the gardening world, because the plants can't scream and call the police, we do that with these pitiful little things. And like, I kept it alive. The goal is not to keep it alive. The goal is to have it be wonderful and happy and thriving. There's plenty of plants out there, so don't think you need to spend the rest of your life trying to make something grow. I've done this my whole life with lilacs. I've searched every genetics on planet Earth, and there are some lilacs that do pretty good, but if I don't water them during a drought, they die. So I got lilacs that are half dead, 3/4 dead, even the best of the lilacs. I don't really share that information with the rest of the public, because it's not worth it. People would love to grow lilacs in the South. People would love to grow peonies in the South. They want to grow tulips in the South, but they're never going to be as adapted as where they're supposed to be. And that's really not gardening, about making something live that doesn't want to be here. Spouse, pet, whatever. You don't need to make it be there if it don't want to be there. So find one that wants to stay. Yes. So these are all things that he found that some of these are available now, some of them aren't, but there are some hostas. And of course, they do bloom too. So that's the hostas that he found that did the best. Blue Angel, Royal Standard, Grand Tiara, and Emerald Tiara. Hellebores, I'd have never thought hellebores did well in Texas. They grow during the wintertime, go kind of dormant during the summer. And so Keith was one that um, helped me figure that out. They come in pinks and whites and purples. Pretty cool plants. Also called Lenten roses because they bloom about the Lenten season. And the flowers turn kind of interesting green colors after they're finished. And then what we used to call leopard plants are now in the genus, they were in the genus Ligularia, now they're in the genus Farfugium, which is a mouthful. They do well, and they're kind of considered hosta substitutes. More adapted to the south, more adapted to Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, underneath the live oak, alkaline soil. And so a better option for a hosta-looking perennial that grows in the shade in Texas. Originally, there was only the spotted form, and then there's ruffled forms and gray leaf forms. So that was the common leopard plant. But there's lots of different stuff now. And just a good, easy to grow, shade-loving perennial. So you've got all these things in between with the big leaves and the slick leaves and the ruffled leaves and the tractor seat plant and all that. So they're getting to be more available. The Farfugiums or Ligularias, just good. Now they do make yellow flowers in the fall, not super showy, sunflower family, but they do give you some added color. That one actually eventually gets 3 times that size, but that's one that's become more common in the trade with the slick leaves and the round leaves. That's the one some gardeners call the tractor seat plant. There it is in our little garden there in Tyler. Fire spike is another fall bloomer, somewhat tropical. Shear it all the way up until September, let it bloom. You get the red spikes on the great hummingbird plant in the fall. So when the hummingbirds are migrating, it's in full bloom. Odontonema strictum or the fire spike. Easy to grow, no pest problems. I hate to get too carried away with native columbines because we worked really hard early in my career to get these things on the market and select the best ones for Texas. There are actually 3 species of, used to be 5 species that were native to Texas. Most columbines that you buy at the store, they're from Europe. Columbine's the state flower of Colorado. They like cool conditions, cold winters, but there's some really special columbines native in West Texas. Unfortunately, they're mostly not grown in the trade anymore. And but if you have some, you can certainly keep them going. So Aquilegia chrysantha, Hinckleyana, Texas Gold was the best one that we introduced way back there. Reseeds, but you have to kind of keep it going. They're fairly short-lived perennials, beautiful flowers, but it has to be native columbines if you grow them in Texas. And then the Aquilegia canadensis is from Central Texas. My late friend Pam Puryear grew them together, and they had a love child that eventually worked for years. They introduced one called Blazing Stars, but these things aren't available anymore. And Greg used to, when I worked in the nursery trade, work with Dr. Parsons, we keep a lot of special plants going and in the trade, but that's hard to do these days because most nurseries, just like shoes and everything else, they just like one source, the whole world buys the same stuff. And so the really showy columbines that you buy at the nurseries aren't very adapted for Texas. Now I have learned if you take native Texas columbines, some of that pretty stuff from the nursery, that they get together and you'll have some really cool offspring. I remember seeing a lady's yard in Dallas. She had blue columbines from the nursery, native yellow columbines, and then the most glorious reseeding blue and yellow children out there running around the yard. But you got to have some tough genetics to pull that off. So if you got somebody that has them, get a start because you generally can't buy them. Turk's cap, that's an example of a plant that we mentioned earlier. Super tough, easy to grow, full sun, full shade, wet soil, dry soil, acid soil, alkaline soil, Roundup resistant, deer-proof, edible fruit, hummingbirds, sulfur butterflies. And then people are like, I don't want it because it can't kill it. So whatever, it's up to you. Easy for a beginning gardener. And then I used to do breeding on these. So I bred a pink one, named it Pam Puryear, a hybrid one called Big Mama. No easier. A white one in there somewhere, named a white one called White Lightning. Easy plant. So if somebody can't garden, you hear this a lot. There are people that say, I can't grow anything, I got a brown thumb. Never tell Greg Grant you can't grow something because I'll put you the meanest garden thug out there. You know, for somebody that can't garden, it's like, oh my gosh, I can grow something. So many people are growing stuff that was going to die that week or that season anyway, and they think it's their fault. So you give them something that lives forever and blooms pretty, like that lady with the hibiscus. She was so proud because she did that. Well, mostly the plant did it, but it makes people feel good. We want to be successful. I like when something dies because I get to plant something new, but most people get disheartened when they kill something. So you're not going to kill a Turk's cap. If you do, don't tell anybody because it's just embarrassing. And no better hummingbird plant in the fall. And so when they're coming through, they will nectar. And of course, I remember when I introduced it, somebody said, yeah, but is it going to attract hummingbirds like the red one? I said, I know it does because my original stock row, there was a RGO garden spider in the pink Turk's cap with a dead hummingbird that had caught in the spider web, and the spider ate, sucked their brains out. So I said, I know for a fact it attracts hummingbirds because one of them died there. And so you talk about a fight, a spider taking down a hummingbird. Occasionally, certain crab spiders will try that, but they're amazing little birds. But yeah, they'll go to Indian Turk's cap, red or not. Indian pink, that's a native eastern perennial that does well from here east. Probably wouldn't pull it off in the alkaline soils, but never pink, always some combination of red-orange. And just a few pictures of the way people grow borders. That's was an American that started a garden in Europe, Lawrence Johnson, at Hidcote Manor, and that was his red border. It's, you can do any theme you want. In this case, it was reds and purples and oranges and yellows, so for hot colors. That's pretty cool. With a clipped hedge behind it. And so most of the time, the only thing that distinguishes a bed from a border is bed is usually something you can walk all the way around. A border is usually something with a brick wall, a hedge, a fence behind it. Otherwise, they're still just a place you plant plants. But these are examples of mixed borders because they got perennials and woody shrubs in there. One thing that I did way back there when Dr. Welch was doing his perennial book and I was helping, and people were saying, well, we don't really have many garden perennials that we can grow in the South. Well, I knew from studying old plants and antique roses and stuff, there were all kind of tough plants out there. And because I was raised from people that didn't shop at the nursery, you just begged and swapped and got free plants. So I set out to do a 100-foot border. My parents had built a house in the country there. And I was going to do a whole perennial border on nothing but pass along plants that happened to be perennials and to show people what there was. And I was going to use every color in the rainbow. And so it was going to be a big color wheel, starting at red on this end and red on that end. So it went red and then purple and then blue and then green and then yellow and orange and red. And it took a while to do it on a budget. But there's the blue section, there's the orange section. So all of these things were passed along, old home blazes, Granny Ruth, that was Miss Rostrum, that was a lady in Stanley, Louisiana, that was on the roadside in Garrison. The Rebecca Baximo, somebody had shared that with my grandmother years ago. And so it was just to show people, yes, we have perennials and unirrigated, no sprinkler system. I'd cut it down once a year and I would tend it and stuff. So somehow we thought the perennials were this, holy grail thing that we'd never be able to do. And so as Dr. Welch was teaching me, I was teaching the public too. So that was my rainbow border. No longer exists. My parents got older and I used to look after 5 landscapes. Now I can barely look after 1. And so nothing lasts forever, but it was fun while it lasted. There's the yellow and the orange, and the orange daylilies came from a home place down the road. The yellow daylilies came from Miss Johnson's house. And so all the liriape that I used for a border, way back when I was a kid, a nursery went out of business in Longview. My mom said, you can buy like 5 things. So I got 1 pot of monkey grass, 1 pampas grass, 1 holly. I can't remember what else I got. So my whole life, I just kept dividing that same liriape in every project I did. Of course, anyway, it just shows you. Miss Rostrum gave me the Savannah canna. There's Granny Ruth's orange canna. Anywho, it just shows you that there's plenty of plants out there. Somehow we think, I can't afford that. I got to have money, got to have a gardener, got to have a sprinkler system. No, you don't. So you just kind of an idea, and you got to like to work outside. And Lord knows everybody needs some exercise and needs to get outside. I got one kid one year telling me about the raspberry crop. I'm like, oh, raspberries are hard to grow. Can barely even grow. And they're telling me about how many pounds they had harvested and stuff. I'm like, what? And I get to, they were doing a virtual crop of raspberries on their phone. This is sad. I mean, so you can garden now and never leave the house. It's maybe if you're bedridden or something, but I mean, a young, healthy person that's like, even when I'm on campus now, like I'm riding my bike, the old man riding across campus on his bike. People are like motorized scooters and everything else. Nobody's going to put the energy into riding a bike. So we need to get outside. We need to garden. We need to connect with nature. And if you do it when you're young, I don't think when I'm working outside, you're sweating and dirty. It's just part of the process. But if you don't do it and you send somebody out later, it's like, oh, Lord, why would I do that? It's hot. It's dirty. I don't want it. There's bugs. We'd get people to come volunteer, get court-ordered volunteers at the Native Plant Center. One lady said one day, I can't do this. I didn't know there were going to be bugs. What? The world is covered with bugs. So apparently you've never been outside before. Like here went a butterfly. They went, oh my gosh, I can't work here. There are bugs. Whatever. Anyway, there was one of my borders. I eventually did a new border on one side of the house. That was year 1, 2, 3. Now, see, when I'm starting something, I'll fill in the gaps with annuals or tropicals or anything, knowing that those perennials are going to eventually spread, or eventually I'm going to divide something because I don't want bare dirt. Now, the very first year, I put pine straw in there because I just didn't have enough stuff. But even by the end of the season, the tough stuff, it filled in, and then you don't have to mulch it anymore. And so you can take any of those plants to any combination you want. You can do big sweeps of stuff. You can do lots of ones. Now, it looks better if you do like a paisley pattern. You do sweeps and masses in scale with your property. So the bigger your property, the bigger your view, and the bigger your landscape, the bigger the sweeps or masses of each plant. So instead of doing, Dr. Creech, my friend and mentor at SFA there, he says he likes to plant in drifts of one. That way a plant collector wants to do one of everything on the planet. Well, it doesn't look so good to have just one of everything. So better to have, like, for smaller planting, maybe 3 or 5 of this. A big planting might be 12 or 15 of that. So you need bigger masses are in scale visually. So when you're looking from the road or the edge of your property, you want to see a mass of that color and a mass of that texture. One of everything, you just see a sprinkling of all different colors, and your eye really can't register what it is. So think about using masses and sweeps of color and that sort of thing. I mentioned Dr. Welch's book. Still to this day, it's the best perennial book for Texas. That was the original edition. What you get from A&M Press now has that cover on it. And so for all the Texas perennials, and because he lived in College Station, but he was from Houston and went to school at LSU, he has a really firm grasp. He's older now, but he had a really firm grasp of southeastern, alkaline, heat tolerant, drought tolerant, moisture tolerant, hurricane tolerant. So it's the book for perennials in Texas. So you get that off of Amazon or from A&M Press, Perennial Garden Color, William C. Welch. And then there's that one he and I did. It includes old-fashioned plants, including perennials. We did that one together. If you suffer from insomnia, I like to write as much as I like to talk. So I do that monthly blog at arbogate.com. I write every Sunday in the Tyler Morning Telegraph, then I repost those articles on Facebook. And so if you want to read along, 52 articles a year. And then I write every issue for Texas Gardener and have now for almost a quarter of a century now. If you're a master gardener and you subscribe to Texas Gardener magazine, used to you had to call. I think you can actually click while you're signing up now. You get a discount for the magazine. So make sure if you're a master gardener, you get Texas Gardener magazine, get your a master gardener discount. And he's when Jay was actually got his master's in horticulture at A&M, got to be friends with Dr. Welch. It's so kind of cool that the original owner sold that magazine. New owners are doing a great job, based out of Brenham now. But in addition to having a number of Aggies and extension people write for that magazine, you got Keith Hansen that writes for it, the former county horticulturist in San Antonio. You got Skip Richter, the former county horticulturist in Brazos County, Harris County, Travis County, and Montgomery County. I write in every issue. Dr. Creech from SFA writes in there. So the best of the best people writing that know Texas garden, and it covers everything from fruit to flowers to vegetables to perennials to natives to you name it. So we used to have 2 gardening magazines in Texas, Neil Sperry and Dallas. It's hard to do print stuff these days and stay in business, newspapers and magazines. So Neil Sperry eventually shut his down. Still does a really cool e-garden newsletter, but we want to keep Texas Gardener in business because it's our only garden magazine left. Most states can't support a magazine for their state, but Texas is big enough that we can and hopefully will continue to do. I think that's it there. So what time is it? Time to go home or time for a break? No. Bathroom break? I can talk for days, and so.
I have Neil Sperry's book. I just got one.
Neil Sperry, he is not in the best health, and he's elderly, but he's still doing his thing.
Yeah.
You know, the sad thing is that early in my career, like, there were all these cool older people, and I was like this young